Last video, we highlighted Garfield's despair and the preparations of the Counter Witch Cult Task Force, so this video will finish up that episode and show how that battle really went. I recommend watching last video first though, since the cut details on Capella and Garfield are actually pretty interesting. You can find that down in the description below. To focus on episode 54 part 2 though, this is the operation to retake City Hall, chapter 5 from volume 17 of the light novel. Starting right where we left off, to further stress just how much Garfield was going through it right now, he failed to protect his newfound family, failed to fulfill his oath to serve as a shield, then challenged an enemy on his own judgment and got beat because of it. Now he had to sit here witnessing just how insignificant all his efforts were, because in comparison to him and his feeble attempts at healing Mimi, Felix's own level of healing was incomparable. The amount of mana he produced made Garfield's look like a drop of rain. It made it seem as if even the dead could be brought back to life with it. When Felix's efforts failed to do anything too though, that's when the price of Garfield's actions were made clear. He could only wallow in despair as the phantom haunting him watched him from a distance. She didn't say anything or even smile, but instead just stared blankly as if to hammer home that this was the consequences of his actions. So, with Felix's initial attempts not doing anything, he would have to rush Mimi down to the hospital, then treat her using what we would consider more conventional methods. That's right, Felix was also quite the surgeon as well. He was more than capable of stitching Mimi up manually. That's why they needed to bring her here, since this was the only place that surgery could be done. Now, it was while such treatment was happening that Lust's broadcasts continued repeatedly. Her insults and intimidation never stopped for a second. Subaru had tried to ignore it as best he could, but beyond her incessant noises, he heard something else. It was a sound he instinctively rejected due to how awful it was, but the more he focused, the more he realized this was the sound of buzzing insects. It was an unfathomable number of them buzzing around, mixing in with the sounds of the broadcast. The weird grinding we heard ourselves in the anime. The intention was to forcibly induce anxiety, since the disgusting nature of it did nothing but manifest the noise of nightmares. It was the supposed punishment for Garfield's transgressions earlier. Now, to further clarify on Mimi's wound here, the unhealable nature of it was a direct result of the Grim Reaper's blessing. A blessing we know from last season only one person could possibly possess. This was information cut from Season 2, so if you'd rather be surprised and keep the spoiler secret, then go ahead and skip to here. If not, the identity of this person was known to be Theresia, the previous Sword Saint and Wilhelm's departed wife. Such news led Wilhelm to reveal the old, unhealed wound his wife previously left him, which was now freshly open due to his close proximity to her. As we should have learned back during Season 2, Episode 1, this was how the blessing of the Grim Reaper worked. Prolonged distance to her, the person who inflicted it, may help the wound to close over time, but as soon as the injured gets anywhere near her again, the wound would instantly open back up as if it was fresh. This was what was happening to Wilhelm's 15-year-old wound right now, as his previously white bandages were now stained red. The whole thing was a very emotional burden for him. To think his wife could still be alive after all these years, well, the thought certainly weighed very heavily on him, especially if she was fighting for the witch cult now. What Wilhelm knew for certain though was that whoever Theresia was now, it certainly wasn't the Theresia he knew that died 15 years ago. No, there would be no hesitation to cut her down, and whoever desecrated her soul like this, well, the Sword Devil would show no mercy. Wilhelm wasn't the only one emanating this fierce conviction, since with Mimi's life now at stake too, Ricardo also had a strong reason to fight himself. He would let out this pure bestial anger to show just how committed he was, a promise of revenge that really resonated with Garfield. Moving on to Subaru's game plan now, the primary concern was of course the media. As for why? Well, with the witch cult possessing an authority that amplified emotions and resonated them, there was no telling how such an ability could be augmented and enhanced by the media. The level of disaster, if it was possible, would be unfathomable. It's for that reason saving Amelia came second, since if the city was destroyed, Subaru wouldn't be able to save Amelia anyway. That being the case, if the first step was to secure the media, then by association it also meant confronting Lust. Now, as strong as everyone present was, Subaru would have liked to be joined by Kiritaka's private White Dragon Scale force as well. They were securing the rest of the Council of 10 though, so that was arguably more important than securing the media. Reason being that if any of the council was captured then interrogated for information, the reveal of Tifon's immovable status could result in Lust destroying the city anyway. Luckily, Al knew they wouldn't have to face multiple archbishops at once, since by Lust's own admission, each was stationed at a different control tower. This presented the possibility they might not even be cooperating, since as Subaru saw himself, Sirius and Regulus almost took each other out. It was clear they weren't the harmonious group Lust was trying to make them out to be. Plus, to think such absurd personalities could work together, well, that was very difficult to envision. So, though this was just all opinion, the plausibility of it was high. It was after this that Felix would exit his surgery, stating how he stopped the bleeding but the wound was still open. Fortunately, the blessing of thirds kept Mimi going, so that shared fatigue and pain was what was keeping her alive. In fact, with just how devastating such a wound was, in order to help Mimi just a little bit more, her brothers strengthened that bond so that they could take a greater share of pain than usual. This gave them more time in prolonging Mimi's life, but the caveat was that if Mimi died, they likely would as well. So, with Hetero and TB out of commission too, that meant all three of their lives were now in the hands of Ricardo. If any of them were gonna live, then the witch cult lady needed to be defeated and fast. It was a problem that warranted the full force of the White Fang. All that was left was for Anastasia to give the order, which she had no problem doing since she too was bothered by the current predicament. I mean, this was, after all, her family. She may act tough when amongst all these people, but deep down she truly cared for Mimi and all the others. So, with the team now established, Crucia's involvement was one founded on duty. Her opinion on the matter was just as strong as it would have been had she not lost her memories. What I mean is that she understood it was her job to fight, and that by not doing so, it would be the civilians that suffered. It was the true wholehearted conviction of someone dedicated to the people. Al had left due to new concerns over Priscilla, but what he also mentioned was that he wasn't good at these fights. According to him, he believed he would just hold everyone back. In any case, the biggest question is how can Subaru walk, and the easiest answer for that is Felix. Despite significant pushback, Subaru had demonstrated resolve so incredibly adamant that Felix had no choice but to cave and use his special trick on him. He made it so Subaru's sense of pain went away. The slightest action would still make it bleed again, but aside from that, Subaru could walk and maybe even run. It was all because if there was even the slightest chance him and his tricks could support the others, then that was a chance he was willing to bet on. Even if it cost him his leg for good, the regret of that wasn't anywhere near comparable to the regret of doing nothing. So that's how Subaru was good to go here. Fast forward to the moments right before the attack, and as Ricardo, Garfield, and Wilhelm tensed up at the battle awaiting them, Julius would use his greater spirits to survey the area and do a bit of recon. With the only entrance being at the front, it made the only option for attack a direct one. So that meant Garfield and Ricardo would get their opportunity for revenge, while for Wilhelm, his fated encounter would come too. Subaru had hoped Julius could use his spirits to scout out inside City Hall too, but the danger of such a task was far too great for them. Reason being that if the witch cult learned from their battle with Sloth, then there was a good chance they came prepared with anti-spirit measures. It was a risk that could end up significantly diminishing Julius's fighting strength, since his power was directly related to the number of spirits he had at his disposal. This brings us now to the start of the attack, which, as we saw, opened up with Crucia's signature skill, One Blow 100 Feld. It was a lethal sword technique built off her blessing of wind reading, one that carried her attack through the air, extending the reach of her sword by tens of yards. Julius acted next, using 3 of his greater spirits to create a barrier of light. It restrained the witch cultists under a field of incredible pressure, bringing them to their knees and opening up the opportunity for everyone else to attack. This is where the fight starts to deviate from the anime, since from here Ricardo took on the giant alone while together Garfield and Wilhelm engaged the lady. There was a moment where both were about to land a hit, but after a swift dodge and incredibly precise movements, the lady instead caught Garfield, broke his nose, then used him as a shield against Wilhelm. She would then use the openings she just created in Wilhelm's defenses and land a powerful kick on him too. Now, Julius's fire spell, though seemingly very powerful, was actually nothing more than a bluff. It was a mere diversion intended to distract the witch cultists into thinking it was a threat. This is because the spell was far too unrefined, making its core easily dispersible just as we saw in the anime. So, with the initial assault being unsuccessful, it did however reveal their two opponents were open to long-range attacks. That being the case, if they prioritized Julius's magic, Crucia's Windblade, and Subaru's whip, then there was a good chance that they could beat them. That's when Capella would arrive to interrupt though, instantly bringing both witch cultists down to their knees. As soon as they heard her unbearable screeching, they quickly showed their respects as if on instinct. This would have been a good opportunity to attack, but never once did either of the cultists let their guard down for a second. Though they were kneeling in reverence, at the same time they kept their eyes trained on Subaru and the others. It was a level of discipline only the most elite warriors could have. Capella's entrance was slightly nerfed in the anime since, rather than simply resting on top of the building, she was instead circling the sky, writhing in midair as she mocked and laughed at everyone. Her form as a dragon was sullied by the absurd movements she made, but that didn't change the fact her wings were the primary target. So long as they were still functional, it meant she could just rain dragon breath whenever she wanted. It was a scenario Wilhelm knew from experience they needed to avoid. Luckily for him though, that same experience from 4 decades ago also made him more than confident Capella could be handled easily. In comparison to the fierce 3-headed dragon Bargren the Black, Capella was really nothing more than an insect. So if all they needed to do was just cut her head off once, then that prolonged fight with Bargren would prove invaluable. They were words that reassured Subaru and the others greatly. They may not have experience fighting a dragon themselves, but with a certified dragon slayer standing right next to them, morale was at an all-time high. Now, an interesting line left out during this encounter was Subaru's attempt to question Capella's claim as the princess. It was upon hearing such an accusation though that Lust couldn't help but respond in utter confusion. It was a response that made it seem like maybe this was the real Capella. Julius's attack then combined the might of all 6 of his greater spirits together, producing the exact same spell he once used on Betelgeuse. It was the sign for the battle to recommence, leading the witch cultists to re-engage them. This time Wilhelm was the one to engage the lady, resulting in a sword fight that could only be described as perfection. To any person who was watching this, the exquisite display in front of them was nothing short of the pinnacle of swordsmanship. On the other hand, Garfield had engaged the giant, setting in motion a battle of brutes. The two were exchanging heavy-hitting blows back and forth. It was shield and fist against arm and greatsword. So, if Wilhelm's battle was a silent symphony, then Garfield's was a roaring thunderstorm. Everyone else was dealing with Capella, who, right before being hit by Julius's attack, unleashed a torrent of dragon breath, scattering black flames everywhere. Had Ricardo not intercepted it with his powerful howling skill, then everyone below would have been hit head-on by it. The thing is, unfortunately Ricardo's skill only dispersed the flames mid-air, sending them scattering everywhere around them. It had created this hellish landscape of fire, burning any and everything around them. Regardless of if the surface was flammable or not, the flames continuously expanded as if they had a life of its own. It was Capella's counter and her moment of, I guess, danger. One that definitely added to her threat level. All we got to see was her regeneration and insults, but by adding this, it would have shown that she's not afraid to engage in combat. Either way, I'm sure that message will be made clear next episode. Now, Capella had a few more comments in line with her perverted nature, then proceeded to give an explanation as to whatever this was. As she would declare herself, this was her conquering death. She was what she referred to as a complete being, someone who was supposedly immortal. This made Subaru's list of enemies even more challenging, since when you really think about who Subaru's been up against, there was one who had bodies to spare, one that drags others down to the grave with them, one who was invincible, and now one that was immortal. The archbishops were definitely not easy opponents. Funnily enough though, it was as Subaru put them all under the same umbrella that Capella would argue that she wasn't like them. For some reason, she didn't like being looped in with the rest of the archbishops. That was the last thing she would say before returning inside, bringing us to a good place to stop before next episode. So if you liked learning more about what you missed from ReZero, then leave a like and subscribe to see more. You can watch last video here or watch my other cut content on Danmachi here. Now, I don't want to overhype Danmachi, but trust me when I say that this season is by far the craziest out of any. You really might be missing out by not watching it right now. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!